Alright guys, what's up? I just threw this video in here real quick. This is just a video that's just explaining you the differences between Gen 3 and Gen 4 SSD and when it's optimized, to its optimum potential or the most they could get out of it versus the two SSDs. Again, he explains and he goes into detail showing how some games there's no difference for it. With others, there's a major difference. And again, this is Spider-Man right here, a perfect example of what Sony did with the SSD and took full advantage of the Gen 4 SSD, the Gen 4 SSD, excuse me. And as you can see, there's a major difference, but I'll let him do the talking.
The final game tested is Spider-Man Remastered, a game that, like I say in all my GPU comparison videos, loves PCIe bandwidth. And here is your proof. At 1080p, the performance difference is massive, going from 84.6 FPS with PCI Express 3 to 134.7 FPS with PCI Express 4, translating into a 59% performance difference. And that same performance difference translates to all resolutions where PCI Express 4 is massively superior. Thing that does not change when using ray tracing. If anything, gets worse. At 1080p, PCI Express 4 is 84% faster than PCI Express 3 in terms of average FPS, and a whopping 140% faster in the 1% lows. Basically, 2.4 times faster. At 4K, for example, the difference is night and day, where we go from 9 average FPS with PCI Express 3 to 20.7 with PCI Express 4. Wow. Massive difference once again. Wow. So if you're going to play Spider-Man Remastered, make sure that you have a PCI Express 4, maybe CPU or card, because if you only have 8 PCIe lanes and PCI Express 3, you're gonna suffer a lot.
So, you heard it from the horse's mouth. Again, now just imagine if this was Spider-Man on a Gen 5 SSD. Now, in order for you to get the fullest out of both components, or I should just say, in order for you to get the fullest out of the Gen 5 SSD, like he said, you need the Gen 5 compatible CPU and GPU, also the motherboard. But even if you don't have these things, you're still seeing somewhat of a performance boost. It's just not gonna be at its full potential. But regardless of the matter, if you're investing major, funds into a PC and you already know the end game, you might as well just shoot for the top, quality available technology that's out there, instead of just buying something that's old and then have to turn around and go buy something anyway. And in this case right here, I could have opted out to run with a Gen 4 SSD for the PS5, but I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to buy SSD, again later if the Pro end up coming out with a Gen 5, which I believe that they're going to do, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Again, I don't work for the company. There's nothing set in stone. There's no leaks, but, again, just looking at the bigger picture here and, the things that Mark Cerny said and, following up with, the obvious roadmap of, climbing the ladder in mid-gen upgrades to next-gen PlayStation 6, all of these things, it just all makes sense. It's, it's common sense. Again, at the same time, you do have to realize there is a budget to some of these things that we have to take into account. So, whatever they decide to give us, this is what we're going to get. But again, if they do use the Ryzen 7 CPUs, we're going to be Gen 5 compatible. If this PlayStation 5 is going to be using the RX 77 XT GPU, that's going to be Gen 5 compatible, just like the 7900 is, because that's what it's coming from. Plus with the RDNA 3, we just have to wait and see. I'm excited. Again, nothing set in stone, but just looking at things that just makes plenty of sense. But we're gonna get back into this video real quick. I don't want to make it too long blabbing.
In game's average, it does not include Resident Evil 4 since the game would not run at higher than 1080p with PCI Express 3, but it does include Spider-Man Remastered using ray tracing. And well, on the average the performance difference stays at around the 9% mark. Nonetheless, some games are very sensitive to bandwidth and will run like crap with only 8 lanes of PCI Express 3. So even though the 16 games averages are okayish, let's say, the real world performance of PCI Express 4 will be much better. Even more in games to come, so make sure that you make the right decision when buying a new computer or upgrading your current one. All said and done, let's move to the conclusion. As conclusion, as you see, it kind of seems that the PCI Express 3 does make the difference. Not in all games, because not all games are really using all that bandwidth, but in games that do take advantage of that bandwidth, like for example Spider-Man, the performance difference is crazy big. It is crazy big, like that specific part that I tested Spider-Man. Even without ray tracing, the performance decrease with PCI Express 3 was insane. While we were having over 130 average FPS with PCI Express 4, we were only having 80 something FPS with PCI Express 3. Now, if you're running, for example, the RX 6700 or something that really has the full 16 PCIe lanes, with PCI Express 3, you'll have the same PCIe bandwidth as 8 lanes of PCI Express 4, meaning that you won't have any issues even if you are using PCI Express 3. The only issue is most likely a CPU or a small CPU or RAM bottleneck, okay? But in terms of bandwidth, you're fine. Plague Tale Requiem using ultra textures, the game just looks gorgeous, and even then at 4K it will be running completely fine even with PCI Express 3 in this card. So it kind of depends on the game, but further games that will come now or come in the future, in the recent future, they will use a lot more PCIe bandwidth, even more games like Forspoken. The newer games will be more like Forspoken because they will most likely use direct storage in order to have way faster load times, and that needs a lot of PCIe bandwidth. So meaning that if you don't have enough PCIe bandwidth, what will happen is that you'll have stutters, you'll have less FPS, and so on. So overall, if you have a system that supports PCI Express 4 both on the motherboard and the CPU, you can grab one of these cards without any issues. But if one of your parts does not support PCI Express 4 and only PCI Express 3, like the CPU or the motherboard, or both, well, then I actually advise you to get one card like the RX 6700 non-XT that costs roughly the same, but at the same time you'll have no issues with PCIe bandwidth, and overall you'll have a better card with a bit less features, but overall a better card with more VRAM. Thanks a lot for watching the...
All right, so we'll just leave it on that note, and we'll continue with the video.